For years, San Francisco stood as one of the most expensive cities on Earth, a place where tiny apartments sold for millions, bidding wars broke out in hours, and owning a home was a distant dream for most residents. But in 2025, that dream finally broke. What used to be a city built on wealth, ambition, and tech-fueled optimism is now staring at a full-blown housing market collapse, the kind that even long-time economists didn't see coming this fast. It started quietly. Home prices dipped a little after the pandemic boom, but few panicked. Realtors said it was a correction, a temporary pause before the next climb. But beneath that calm surface, cracks were forming. Tech layoffs were accelerating, companies were fleeing to cheaper states, and mortgage rates were climbing to their highest levels in over 2 decades. Buyers vanished almost overnight. By mid-year, things took a sharp turn. Homes that once sparked bidding wars sat unsold for months. Luxury condos downtown dropped in value by double digits. Even tech executives, once the safest bet in the market, began offloading properties at losses just to escape rising taxes and shrinking equity. The city's glittering skyline, once a symbol of endless growth, started to look more like a reminder of excess gone wrong. And the government could no longer pretend everything was fine. Property tax revenue began to shrink, developers paused construction, and affordable housing projects stalled mid-build. What was once California's model city had turned into a warning sign for the entire state. For Governor Gavin Newsom, this wasn't just bad economics, it was personal. San Francisco is his home turf, the city where his political career began. Watching it unravel in real time wasn't just politically embarrassing, it was infuriating. He had promised reform, investment, and recovery. Instead, he was watching the housing capital of the West Coast fall apart piece by piece, and for the first time, even his strongest supporters started to ask, did the governor lose control of the one thing Californians care about most, their homes? When the numbers started coming in, Governor Gavin Newsom's confidence cracked. Reports showed that San Francisco's housing prices had plunged nearly 18% year-over-year, the steepest drop since the Great Recession. Homes that once sold in a week were sitting unsold for months, and luxury developments he'd once praised as the future of urban living were now half-empty towers drowning in debt. For a man who had built much of his political identity around revitalizing California's cities, the collapse of his hometown felt like a personal failure. Behind the cameras, insiders say Newsom was livid. At private meetings with city leaders, he reportedly demanded to know how this happened so fast. He had pushed for years to ease zoning restrictions, fast-track construction, and bring affordability to the state's housing market. Yet now, even with new legislation and billions in funding, the opposite was happening. Prices were crashing, projects were halting, and California's housing crisis was mutating into something far worse, a confidence collapse. Publicly, the governor tried to stay composed, but his frustration showed through the cracks. During a recent press conference, when a reporter asked if his housing reforms had failed, Newsom snapped back. The market's not broken, it's being fixed. We're correcting decades of dysfunction. But his tone betrayed him, defensive, sharp, almost desperate to convince the room that the collapse was temporary. Political analysts were quick to notice. One commentator put it bluntly, you can hear the panic in his voice. Because for the first time, Newsom's political stronghold, the liberal, wealthy Bay Area, wasn't applauding his leadership. They were questioning it. Voters who once saw him as the man who could fix California's housing nightmare now viewed him as the man standing on the sidelines while it burned down. And it wasn't just about real estate numbers. It was about perception. The governor who had promised progress now looked reactive, overwhelmed, and out of touch. He could blame interest rates, he could blame federal policy, he could even blame the pandemic. But to the public, this was California's problem, and he was California's leader. By the time housing data hit national headlines, one phrase was trending on social media: Newsom loses it. It captured the moment perfectly, not because the governor had literally lost control of himself, but because the crisis had finally slipped out of his hands. San Francisco's housing crash didn't happen overnight. It was a slow unraveling that everyone saw coming but no one wanted to admit. The signs were there for months, hiding in plain sight. Tech layoffs, rising interest rates, and a mass migration of Californians packing up their lives and leaving the state. For years, the city's housing market thrived on hype, fueled by startup millionaires, venture capital, and cheap borrowing. But when the money dried up, reality came crashing down harder than anyone expected. The first domino was the tech industry. When Silicon Valley began downsizing in 2023, thousands of high-paying jobs disappeared. Remote work became the norm, and office towers emptied almost overnight. Neighborhoods built around tech wealth, Soma, Mission Bay, parts of Palo Alto, suddenly had "for sale" signs everywhere. The luxury condos that once symbolized success now sat dark, their glass windows reflecting a city losing its shine. Then came the interest rates. For over a decade, California's housing boom had been fueled by cheap loans and speculative buying. But when the Federal Reserve hiked rates to combat inflation, mortgage costs doubled. A home that once required a $4,000 monthly payment now demanded nearly $8,000. Even wealthy buyers stepped back, waiting for prices to fall. That pause turned into panic. Meanwhile, California's population drain accelerated. Families fed up with taxes, crime, and the cost of living moved to Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, states where their San Francisco rent money could buy them a house with a yard. By 2025, San Francisco's population had dropped to levels not seen since the 1980s. Fewer people meant fewer buyers, and fewer buyers meant collapsing demand. Investors noticed too. Developers who once saw gold in San Francisco started pulling projects. Construction paused mid-frame, cranes stopped spinning, and unfinished concrete shells became the new skyline. Every stalled project sent a signal: the boom was officially over. And then there's psychology, the quiet killer of every market. Once people believe values will fall, they stop buying. The same investors who once fought to outbid each other suddenly vanished, waiting for the bottom that never seems to arrive. By the time economists declared the city's housing market in free fall, it wasn't just a correction, it was a reckoning. The system that built San Francisco's wealth had turned on itself. And as prices plummeted, what had once been a playground for the rich became a warning for the entire country. Even the strongest markets can crumble when the foundation is built on speculation, not stability. If you walk through downtown San Francisco right now, it doesn't feel like the same city it was a few years ago. You still see the glass towers, the shiny new condos, and the tech logos on the sides of buildings, but something's missing. The people, the energy, the money. It's quiet now, almost unsettlingly quiet. Office buildings that once had waiting lists for tenants are now half empty. In some parts of the city, entire floors are dark. Developers spent billions building these skyscrapers, thinking demand would never end. But when remote work became the norm and tech companies started cutting costs, those offices turned into expensive ghosts. It's not just the corporate spaces either. Condos that once sold above asking price are now sitting unsold for months. Some have been relisted again and again, each time for a little less. Realtors who used to brag about offers within 24 hours are now begging for showings. Even investors are staying away. Nobody wants to catch a falling knife. Drive by a few of the new developments and you'll see the damage. Construction sites frozen mid-frame. Cranes standing still. Plywood covering unfinished entrances. These were meant to be luxury homes for a booming market that doesn't exist anymore. And the workers who built them? Many of them are gone, laid off or moved out of state for better paying jobs. What makes it worse is how sudden it all feels. 1 minute, San Francisco was the city everyone wanted a piece of. Now, people can't seem to leave fast enough. The restaurants that served tech workers every lunch hour have closed. Coffee shops that used to be full from open to close now see a handful of customers a day. You talk to locals and they all say the same thing: it doesn't feel like San Francisco anymore. There's this sense that the dream the city sold, of innovation, wealth, and progress, just ran out of gas. Developers are calling it a market adjustment. But if you live there, it feels more like a slow collapse. Empty buildings, falling prices, fewer jobs, all signs of a city caught between what it used to be and what it's becoming. When prices started falling, the first people to panic weren't developers or investors, it was regular homeowners. The families who stretched every dollar to buy a piece of San Francisco while the market was still hot. For years, they were told the same thing: real estate here never goes down. But that line doesn't age well when your $1.6 million condo is suddenly worth $1.2 million and still dropping. Across the city, people are quietly realizing they're trapped. They can't sell without losing money. They can't refinance because interest rates are too high. And they can't just walk away, not with mortgages that will follow them for decades. Some have resorted to renting out rooms or moving in with relatives just to stay afloat. It's not the glamorous Silicon Valley life people imagine when they think of San Francisco. It's survival. You hear stories that used to be unthinkable in this city: young couples who bought starter homes in 2021 now handing the keys back to the bank. Tech workers who made six figures but can't afford their mortgages after layoffs. People trying to list homes, only to watch the value fall faster than they can adjust the price. For a city that prided itself on being bulletproof, the crash hit the middle class the hardest. And while the numbers are bad, the psychology is worse. Homeowners feel betrayed by the market, by the city, by leaders who promised affordability but delivered instability. Property taxes are still sky high, insurance costs have climbed, and in some neighborhoods, crime and homelessness have driven even more people out. Every sign tells them the same thing: San Francisco isn't the sure thing it used to be. There's also an emotional side no one really talks about: the guilt of losing something you worked your whole life for. People who once bragged about owning in the city now avoid the topic altogether. Their homes, once symbols of success, have become quiet reminders of financial mistakes and broken promises. And yet, selling isn't an option. Not when the offers that do come in are 20 to 30% below what you owe. So they wait, hoping for a turnaround, a recovery, or maybe just a little bit of honesty from the people in charge. But for now, they're stuck. San Francisco's housing dream turned into a debt trap, and for thousands of families, there's no clear way out. If you want to understand how deep San Francisco's housing mess runs, talk to the people who actually build it, the developers. On paper, they should be thriving. Prices were high for years, demand was endless, and the city's leaders promised to cut red tape to get more homes built. But if you ask any developer now, they'll tell you the same story: it's become almost impossible to build in San Francisco without losing money. The crash didn't just wipe out demand, it exposed how broken the system was all along. Permits take years to get approved, labor costs have skyrocketed, and new regulations keep piling up. By the time a project finally breaks ground, the market has already changed. Developers say they're stuck playing catch-up with a city that never moves fast enough. And when the market turned, all those delays became deadly. Projects that made sense when condos sold for $1,800 a square foot now look insane when buyers have vanished. Some developers simply walked away mid-construction, leaving half-finished buildings behind. Others are trying to convert empty office towers into apartments. A good idea in theory, but a bureaucratic nightmare in practice. What's frustrating for builders is that city leaders still talk about a housing shortage, even as thousands of new units sit empty or unfinished. Developers argue it's not a shortage of housing, it's a shortage of realistic policy. They say the city keeps chasing political headlines about affordable housing while ignoring basic math. You can't force people to build if the costs don't make sense. Some builders who stuck it out through the crash are now openly criticizing the city. One developer said, "You spend more time fighting permits than laying concrete." Another called San Francisco a graveyard for investors. That kind of sentiment used to be whispered. Now it's being said out loud. Meanwhile, the city blames the developers, accusing them of greed, of sitting on land, of refusing to adapt. It's a circular argument with no winners. While both sides point fingers, the cranes stay still and the skyline remains frozen in time. And in the middle of all that tension, Governor Newsom's name keeps coming up. Developers say his statewide housing policies sound great in speeches but fall apart in practice. They expected leadership. Instead, they got layers of new committees and zero real progress. In short, San Francisco's building boom has turned into a blame game. And while politicians and developers argue over who's responsible, the city continues to crumble, one empty tower at a time. For decades, tech was the engine that kept San Francisco running. Every boom, every spike in housing prices, every packed coffee shop and sold-out condo came back to one thing: the endless flow of tech money. But the same industry that built the city's fortune is also the one that quietly tore it down. When remote work became the norm, it changed everything. The heart of San Francisco used to beat during rush hour, trains packed with engineers, cafeterias full, Uber drivers running nonstop. But when companies like Meta, Google, and Salesforce started letting workers stay home, that rhythm stopped overnight. Suddenly, the tech workforce didn't need to live in the city that defined their careers. They could work from Austin, Boise, or even Bali, and many did. The result was brutal. Office occupancy rates plunged to record lows. Downtown businesses that relied on tech workers to survive, from lunch spots to dry cleaners, began closing one by one. And without that daily flow of people, property values started slipping. When the office lights went out, the housing market followed. Then came the layoffs. Between 2023 and 2024, thousands of Bay Area tech workers were cut. Startups collapsed, giants froze hiring, and bonuses disappeared. For a housing market that fed off six-figure salaries and IPO cash-outs, that was a death blow. Mortgage applications from tech professionals dropped by nearly half. The same people who once fought bidding wars for tiny condos were now listing those same homes just to stay liquid. Investors noticed the shift too. Venture capital dried up, and with it, the optimism that kept the city afloat. Without tech expansion, there's no demand for housing. Without demand, there's no construction. And without construction, there's no tax revenue. A vicious cycle that's left City Hall scrambling for answers. Even culturally, the tone of the city has changed. Tech once gave San Francisco its energy, a sense that the next big thing was always around the corner. Now, that buzz has faded. People talk more about leaving than building. And the young innovators who used to dream of moving here are choosing Miami, Austin, or Seattle instead. In the end, it wasn't just the economy that changed, it was the identity of the city itself. San Francisco built its future on tech, but never prepared for what would happen if that future moved away. When the market first started to wobble, most politicians stayed quiet. They thought it would blow over like every other California correction. But when prices began to tank and the media started using words like collapse and free fall, the silence broke. Suddenly, everyone wanted someone to blame. And for many in California politics, that person was Governor Gavin Newsom. At first, the criticism came from the edges: small-town mayors, frustrated city councils, local housing advocates who felt ignored. But as the crisis deepened, the attacks started coming from inside his own party. Lawmakers who once backed his housing reform bills began distancing themselves. They said the governor's promises of streamlining development and fixing affordability were all talk and no results. In San Francisco, where Newsom once served as mayor, the backlash hit hardest. Residents remember his early political days, when he vowed to make the city a model for progressive housing policy. Now, they see empty buildings, rising homelessness, and falling prices, and they're asking what happened. The irony is painful. The man who built his career on housing reform is now watching that same issue undo his legacy. Meanwhile, the state's opposition party seized the moment. They labeled him out of touch, accusing him of caring more about photo ops than actual policy. One commentator even joked that Newsom was too busy thinking about the White House to notice the roofs caving in at home. The jab went viral not because it was funny, but because it hit a nerve. Even within the media, patience started to wear thin. Local journalists began digging into state housing funds, uncovering stalled projects and ballooning budgets. Stories of affordable units sitting empty because of bureaucratic delays became a recurring headline. It wasn't just a financial mess, it was a political one, and it was sticking to Newsom fast. At public events, the tone changed too. Instead of polite applause, Newsom was met with pointed questions and frustration. The same voters who once praised him for his calm confidence now saw someone scrambling to explain what went wrong. Every soundbite about long-term solutions only made people angrier, because Californians are tired of hearing about plans. They want results. By the end of the summer, the backlash wasn't just political noise, it was a full-blown credibility crisis. And in politics, that's harder to recover from than any market crash. Behind every headline about the market crash, there are real people trying to survive it. Families who spent their life savings just to buy a home now find themselves staring at numbers that don't make sense. Teachers, nurses, and small business owners who believed in the promise of California are watching their neighborhoods empty out. Some are moving in with family, others are packing up entirely, heading for states where life feels doable again. Homelessness, already a crisis before the crash, is getting worse. Evictions are rising. Shelters are overflowing. Even those with jobs are struggling to afford rent as wages lag behind inflation. It's not just an economic failure, it's an emotional one. You can feel it walking through the city. People look tired, defeated. The optimism that used to define San Francisco is gone, replaced by quiet frustration and the question no one can answer. What happened to us? What's happening in San Francisco isn't staying in San Francisco. The same pressures, high interest rates, overvalued markets, and shrinking populations are creeping into Los Angeles, San Diego, and Sacramento. California has always been seen as the place where the future happens first, but right now, that future looks uncertain. The crash isn't just about housing. It's about trust, in leadership, in the system, in the idea that working hard in this state guarantees stability. For decades, people came to California chasing opportunity. Now, they're leaving chasing affordability. Economists say markets recover, but this feels deeper than numbers. It feels cultural. If the state that once defined the American dream can't sustain its own people, what does that say about where the country is headed? San Francisco's collapse isn't just a housing story, it's a warning shot. And for the first time in a long time, California is realizing that even golden states can crack.